Welcome back, brave souls, to another journey into the eerie and unsettling. Tonight, we have a story submitted by Miguel, a subscriber from the Philippines. His tale takes us deep into the past, during the Spanish colonial era, where the line between reality and superstition was often blurred. It's a story of love, fear, and dark accusations that threaten to destroy a family. So sit back, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself for a haunting tale that will leave you questioning the nature of truth and the power of fear. Dear Mr. Phantom Knight, my name is Miguel, and I'm writing to share a story that has haunted my family for generations. It's a tale my grandmother used to tell me, one that her own grandmother, my great-grandmother, Rosa, experienced firsthand. The events took place during the Spanish colonial era in the Philippines, in a time when superstition and fear ruled the lives of many, and where a single rumor could mean the difference between life and death. Rosa was a young woman at the time, serving as a butler in the household of a wealthy Spanish family. The family she served was one of the most powerful in the region, Don Alejandro and his daughter, Señorita Isabella. They lived in a grand mansion that sat on a hill overlooking the village, a place that was both admired and feared by the locals. The mansion itself was an imposing structure, built from dark stone with tall, narrow windows that gave it a forbidding appearance. It was surrounded by dense forests, and many of the villagers believed it was haunted. Strange sounds were often heard at night, whispers carried by the wind, footsteps echoing through the trees, and the occasional sighting of a shadowy figure moving through the woods. But it wasn't the mansion that the villagers feared the most. It was Señorita Isabella. She was a woman of striking beauty, with pale skin, dark hair, and eyes that seemed to pierce right through you. But her beauty was overshadowed by the mystery that surrounded her. She was rarely seen during the day, and when she did appear, it was only for brief moments, always under the cover of a parasol or the shade of the mansion's verandas. The villagers whispered about her in hushed tones, spreading rumors that she was not entirely human. They said she was an aswang, a creature of the night that fed on the blood of the living. These rumors were fueled by the strange occurrences that had begun to plague the village: livestock found drained of blood, children falling ill with strange, unexplainable symptoms, and the constant feeling that something was watching them from the shadows. Rosa, however, knew a different side of Isabella. She had served the family for years and had grown close to the señorita. Isabella was not the monster the villagers believed her to be. She was a kind and gentle soul, trapped in a life of loneliness and sorrow. Her mother had died when she was very young, and her father, Don Alejandro, was a stern man who ruled his household with an iron fist. Isabella's only solace came from the rare moments she could escape the mansion and wander the gardens at night, where she felt free from the oppressive weight of her father's expectations. It was during one of these midnight walks that she met Tomas, a young farmer who worked the land owned by Don Alejandro. Tomas was a strong and handsome man with a kind heart and a gentle spirit, and he quickly caught Isabella's eye. Their meeting was accidental. Tomas had been working late in the fields and was returning home when he saw her standing among the flowers, her face lit by the moonlight. He was captivated by her beauty, but also by the sadness he saw in her eyes. They began to talk, and what started as a simple conversation soon blossomed into a secret romance. They met whenever they could, always under the cover of darkness, away from the prying eyes of the villagers and the watchful gaze of Don Alejandro. But as their love grew, so did the rumors. The villagers noticed Isabella's increasing absence during the day and her frequent nighttime walks. They began to suspect that she was indeed an aswang, and that Tomas, in his love for her, had fallen under her spell. The livestock deaths were blamed on her, as were the strange illnesses that had begun to afflict the children of the village. One particularly eerie night, the village was struck by a series of bizarre and terrifying events. It began with the howling of the dogs, an unearthly sound that echoed through the night, sending shivers down the spines of those who heard it. The dogs, normally quiet and docile, seemed to have gone mad, barking and growling at something unseen in the darkness. Then came the shadows. They appeared first as faint outlines, moving through the trees around the village. At first, the villagers thought it was just their imagination, but as the night wore on, the shadows grew more defined, taking on the shapes of figures. Tall, gaunt figures with glowing eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire. These shadowy figures moved silently through the village, slipping through the cracks in doors and windows, leaving a trail of cold, clammy air in their wake. Rosa was in the mansion that night, tending to the household duties. The air inside was heavy with a sense of impending doom, and even the servants seemed on edge, jumping at every sound. As she made her way through the darkened hallways, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The shadows in the corners of the rooms seemed to move of their own accord, and the flickering candlelight cast eerie shapes on the walls. Rosa's unease grew as she approached Señorita Isabella's room. The door was slightly ajar, and from inside, she heard a faint whispering, like the sound of someone speaking in a language she couldn't understand. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pushed the door open, half expecting to see one of the shadowy figures standing over Isabella's bed. But the room was empty, save for Isabella, who sat by the window, staring out into the night. Her face was pale, and her eyes were distant, as if she were in a trance. Rosa called her name softly, but Isabella didn't respond. She seemed completely unaware of Rosa's presence, her gaze fixed on something far beyond the confines of the room. As Rosa approached her, she noticed something strange, a thin line of blood running down Isabella's arm, dripping onto the floor. Rosa gasped, rushing forward to examine the wound, but there was no cut, no injury that could have caused the blood. It was as if the blood had simply appeared, seeping from her skin without any apparent cause. Isabella finally turned to look at Rosa, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. "They're coming for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They won't stop until they've destroyed everything." Rosa didn't understand what she meant, but the fear in Isabella's voice was enough to send chills down her spine. She wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be all right, but deep down, she knew that something terrible was about to happen. As she looked out of the window, Rosa noticed that the shadows in the garden were growing darker, more ominous. The moonlight seemed to be swallowed by an unseen force, leaving the grounds in almost complete darkness. Then she saw them, figures moving through the trees, their forms indistinct but menacing. They were not human, but something else, something ancient and malevolent. Rosa recoiled from the window, fear gripping her heart. She knew they had to act fast. "We need to leave, Señorita," she urged, grabbing Isabella's hand. But Isabella remained frozen, her gaze locked on the dark figures outside. "They won't stop until they get what they want," Isabella said, her voice trembling. "They want me. They've always wanted me." Rosa felt a chill run down her spine as the shadows seemed to press closer, their presence almost tangible. The room grew colder, and the faint scent of decay filled the air. The shadows outside the window twisted and writhed as if they were alive, and the temperature in the room dropped suddenly, frost forming on the edges of the glass. Rosa's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she tried to pull Isabella away from the window. But Isabella stood her ground, her expression a mixture of resignation and fear. "I can't leave," she whispered. "They won't let me." A sudden, loud knock on the door startled both women. Rosa's heart nearly stopped as she turned to face the entrance. The knocking was slow and deliberate, each rap echoing through the room like the tolling of a death bell. The doorknob twisted slightly, as if someone, or something, was trying to enter. Panic surged through Rosa. She rushed to the door, pushing against it with all her might, trying to keep whatever was outside from coming in. But the pressure on the other side grew stronger, and the door began to creak ominously. The knocking continued, growing louder, more insistent, until it became a thunderous pounding that shook the walls. "Please, Señorita, we must go now," Rosa pleaded, her voice shaking. But Isabella remained rooted to the spot, her eyes wide with terror. "It's too late," she whispered. "They're here." With a final deafening crash, the door burst open, throwing Rosa to the ground. She looked up in horror as a thick, impenetrable darkness filled the room, swallowing the light from the candles. In the center of the darkness stood a figure, a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes that glowed like embers. His presence exuded pure malevolence, and Rosa could feel the air grow heavy with dread. The figure pointed a bony finger at Isabella, and she screamed, a sound that echoed through the mansion, chilling Rosa to her very core. The darkness surged forward, engulfing Isabella, and for a moment it seemed as though the world itself had been swallowed by the night. But then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the darkness receded, leaving behind an eerie silence. The figure was gone, and Isabella lay on the floor, unconscious but alive. Rosa scrambled to her side, shaking her gently, desperate to wake her. When Isabella's eyes finally fluttered open, they were filled with tears. "They've taken something from me," Isabella whispered, her voice broken. "Something I can never get back." The terror of that night marked the beginning of the end for Isabella. She became a shadow of her former self, withdrawing further into the mansion and rarely speaking to anyone, even Tomas. The rumors continued to spread, and the villagers grew bolder in their accusations. But the truth was far darker than they could have imagined. The figure that had appeared in the mansion was not just a manifestation of their fears. It was something far older and more powerful, a being that had existed long before the Spanish arrived in the Philippines. It had taken root in the land, feeding on the fear and superstition of the people, and it had marked Isabella as its own. Tomas, who had witnessed the aftermath of that night, was desperate to save the woman he loved. He sought out a local healer, an old woman who lived on the outskirts of the village, known for her knowledge of the supernatural. She listened to Tomas's story and shook her head gravely. "The darkness that has taken hold of her is ancient," the healer said. "It feeds on fear and cannot be banished by force. The only way to save her is to confront it, to face the darkness without fear." But confronting the darkness was easier said than done. Tomas, brave as he was, found himself paralyzed by the thought of facing the malevolent entity. Yet his love for Isabella was stronger than his fear, and he knew he had to try. The healer provided Tomas with a ritual, a way to call forth the darkness and challenge it directly. It was a dangerous proposition, one that could cost him his life, but Tomas was determined. He returned to the mansion, where Isabella waited, her skin pale and her spirit all but broken. That night, as the wind howled outside and the shadows gathered once more, Tomas began the ritual. The air grew thick with tension as he chanted the ancient words, his voice trembling but resolute. The candles flickered wildly, and the darkness in the corners of the room seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Suddenly, the figure reappeared, its hollow eyes locking onto Tomas. The temperature in the room plummeted, and a deep, guttural growl resonated through the walls. But Tomas stood his ground, refusing to let his fear take hold. He continued the chant, his voice growing louder, more defiant. The darkness recoiled, its form twisting and writhing as if in pain. The figure's eyes blazed with fury, and it lunged toward Tomas, its clawed hands reaching out to grasp him. But Tomas didn't falter. He held the creature's gaze, pouring all of his love for Isabella into his words. With a final desperate cry, Tomas completed the ritual. The figure let out a bone-chilling scream, and the darkness imploded, collapsing in on itself, before dissipating into the night. The air in the room cleared, and the oppressive weight lifted. Isabella, who had been watching in terrified silence, felt a surge of relief. The malevolent presence was gone, but the scars it left behind would never fully heal. Tomas collapsed to the floor, exhausted but alive, and Isabella rushed to his side. "You saved me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You saved us both." But their victory came at a cost. The villagers, now fully convinced of Isabella's otherworldly nature, demanded that she be taken away, out of fear that the darkness would return. Despite Tomas's protests, Don Alejandro could no longer protect his daughter from the wrath of the villagers. Isabella was sent away to a convent, where she lived out the rest of her days in solitude. Tomas never forgot her, and the love they shared remained a source of strength for him until his dying day. But the memory of that night, of the darkness that nearly consumed them both, haunted him for the rest of his life. As for Rosa, she continued to serve the family, always keeping a watchful eye on the shadows that lingered in the corners of the mansion. She knew that the darkness was never truly gone, that it was always waiting, biding its time, feeding on the fear of those who dared to look too closely into the unknown. My grandmother told me this story countless times, each retelling a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, and the power of love to overcome even the darkest of fears. It's a story that has been passed down through generations in my family, a reminder of the thin line between reality and the supernatural, and how easily fear can twist the truth into something monstrous. Thank you for allowing me to share this tale with you. It's a piece of my family's history, and I hope it serves as a reminder to always question what you fear and to seek the truth, even when it's hidden in the darkest corners of our world. Miguel's story is a chilling reminder of how fear and superstition can twist reality into something terrifying. It also speaks to the courage it takes to confront the unknown and to stand by those we love, even when the odds seem insurmountable. If this tale resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories that delve into the shadows of our past. Don't forget to like and share this video with others who enjoy exploring the darker side of history. Remember, the truth is often hidden in the places we least expect. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.